them live. So it's a pleasure to be here with people like you all know a lot in this pellet industry. I would like to start by asking, how do you see the market this year, and what's your vision? How this is going to evolve, this market is going to evolve during the next year or campaign. So we're going to start with you, Pablo. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the national market because of European representatives, as Manolis, they can give you a more global vision. But from my point of view, talking about consumption, it has improved a lot because, as you said, we are coming from two winters that were very mild, and this one was not the worst winter like glaciation, but the temperature was more normal and there was a lot of rain and it was more like wintering, and so there was a better consumption compared to previous years, and it was more dynamic, the market. And it's true that we're coming from very, very bad 2 years, and we had a lot of stock at the factories and distributors and suppliers. So all of them have been taking these pallets, and it's been empty, and the production has been regulated. So the production has reduced a little bit, around 15 or 20%. And right now we are just making the counting. Yes, we're talking about pallets from Spain, because we also have pellets from Portugal, and we sent some pellets to France. So this is like the global vision in only 10 seconds. Could we see that this was general in all the communities like Galicia and Catalonia? Can you hear me? Well, we started as all the manufacturers with a lot of stock, and it has been a year that it was hard to face different challenges, mainly the export, that it was an output channel to overstock, and we were started the season like that, so it was a good option. But it wasn't easy as a manufacturer because we had to sell a lot of quantity at the cost price. So it wasn't a great year for us. But the temperatures started this year being mild, but you know that the drought problem we had in Catalonia. So the rains were very welcomed in Catalonia because we could extend the winter during these months. So it was helping us to lower the stocks. But it was a complicated year because at the end it could have been worse, of course, worse, but it was complicated because as a manufacturer we had to regulate the productive capacity based on the demand with all the uncertainties of the market. And thanks to the countries as France, who has a great consumption, we could leader this export. You mean the export to European markets, right? Because the winters were worse. Yes, well, actually, if you check the heating days in France, it wasn't too cold in France. But if we talk, well, Manolis can tell us better about this, but in Poland, they stopped exporting, so they had more self-consumption. So there was a lot of mass balancing, and we could readjust it. So at the north of France, they were consuming a lot, and the north of Poland as well. So they were freeing some part of the market, and we could introduce our product there. So thank you so much, David. Francisco, how is the situation in Galicia? Well, it was a complicated winter, but on the other side, we are very thankful that it was the first winter after 2 years of convulsory situation from 2022. It was a mild winter, but a long winter. So that allowed us to adjust the production, but the demand in the market was there, and it was continuous. So I would like to highlight the fact that we are starting to stabilize all the prices. It was quite different because the campaign index was disruptive because it was a change of taxes. And there was a different photography from different factories, but we could adjust all the prices, but the distributors, they had different prices based on the material they bought from different previous campaigns. So it took them some time to adjust the prices, not as much as the factories, but it was a complicated winter based on the cost because the raw material started to rise and is not going to stop. And the Galician market, we had a condition because of all the plagues that we have in our forests. So we have a lot of restrictions of raw material moving in Galicia, and it was growing as the same. The raw material was growing, but the consumption was going down. So the general market, even though we have the difficulties, we had a positive balance because the winter was long, but we are hoping that the market could be more stabilized. What's the main raw material that we're talking about? In our case, I think is pine trees and the byproducts of the first transformation of the wood, and it's mainly pine tree. For pellets, how do you see this campaign, and what's your vision about what's going to happen in this market that we think is quite uncertain? Could you please tell us, Roberto? Well, I agree with my colleagues because we are coming from a situation that it was very anomalous from 2022, mainly because there was a raw material crisis. Everything was compulsory, and the wood market at the beginning was quite local, but it was behaving in a global market, and we suffered that wave. And also two mild winters and short winters compared to the previous ones, and they were conditioning the campaign because the last winter campaign we finished with a lot of stock, so that made conditioned this campaign and made it quite anomalous based on the prices I'm talking about. And talking about climate, it was quite normal this campaign, because talking that it is cold in this winter, it sounds like it's normal, but it should be like that because this winter has been reasonable. And we achieved in Europe a regularization of this overstock, surplus that has blocked the market transit, trading transit, and that changed. But in the future, I guess it's going to be the same. We're going to depend on the climate because our sector depends on that. But the winters are going to start to be reasonably normal as the one we just passed. We are going to tend to stability because we want that the manufacturers, as manufacturers, we are looking for stabilities, and regarding the anomalies, as in 2022 and my winters, those are very, very hard to manage. Manolis, how do you see it at a European level? You had to translate that. ¿Cómo ves esto a nivel europeo? Sobre todo el año pasado y el futuro. Bueno, creo que no es un secreto que en los últimos 2 o 3 años hemos estado en una situación bastante peculiar en el sector del pellet, porque históricamente siempre dependía de la climatología. Se hacía frío, se hacía calor. Los productores estaban produciendo más pellets, entonces esto era muy normal en el mercado. Menos frío, el mercado iba más despacio. Era algo general en un nivel europeo, siempre. En el sector del pellet premium siempre depende del tiempo, de la climatología. También está el hecho de la nueva demanda orgánica, pero cuando tenemos que hablar del consumo de los clientes, el mayor factor principal es el deporte, es el clima. Pero si estamos hablando de este tipo de situaciones, como el año pasado, está comprando más pellets de cualquier precio sin ni siquiera haber una demanda de verdad, porque en el 2021 era un año cálido. Esto crea una situación en la que en muchos países de Europa, en diferentes sitios de proveedores, hemos tenido gran stock. Pero yo creo que esto solamente hasta ahora, desde 2 años después, que hemos empezado por fin a terminar con estos stocks que teníamos ahí remanentes. Y ahora estamos volviendo a una situación en la que estamos empezando desde cero, porque en algunos sitios tienen que estar pendientes de cuál es el consumo que está habiendo real. Pero si ves que esto va a subir el consumo o que va a haber mayor material, hay que normalizar el presente para el futuro. Y si queremos hablar sobre el futuro, que esperamos, Europa tiene una base de consumidores existente bastante estable y creemos que el mayor desafío para el sector es que tenemos que volver a un crecimiento orgánico, a tener nuevos clientes y que quieran invertir en esto y utilizar pellets como una nueva solución, y esto ayudará al mercado a crecer en el futuro. And seeing what's the situation, the weather-driven situation, what are the measurements that you think is going to be important to reactivate the pellet sector? What could we do? Pablo? I think a support from the government, clearly that's a good option. More than support, they should stop being so restrictive because it's very complicated. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they started with a scheme support to heating systems, and we had to fill reports that they were filled only by technicians because that was so complicated. So the grandpa who is at home who wants to use a pellet stove, and you start telling him that he has to fill, I don't know how many greenhouse gas emissions with a calculator, that makes everything very complicated, because we are at the moment that if you want to install something as an individual, you have to fill all these reports. Those subsidies finished 1.5 years, but what I'm trying to say is that if you want to support us, please make things easier. And many times what we don't want is to have to put some limitations to us, barriers. So what we want from the government is to avoid all these barriers and finish with all this news that they're saying that they're going to prohibit pellet stoves, but that's not true. They're actually going to change the emission standard, but they're not going to prohibit the pellet stoves. So there is a new regulations that are going to restrict the limits, but we are negotiating. But if the press starts being tricky and saying that they are going to prohibit the boilers and stoves, we are doing horrible ads. So because people will say, no, I don't want to buy anything. Yes, because they're thinking about 2 years ahead. So from the government, you think that they could do something else? Is there any other idea about how to reactivate this sector? Well, I brought some tips here with me. So I'm going to start reading the points from cluster biomass. These are going to be interesting for all of you, and I hope I can share this with my colleagues. The first measure will be to reduce the taxes as the main measure. The biomass tax and the biopellet in particular was we want to have this equitative. We don't want to be treated as special, but to be the same as other fuels. So we want to compare to all their fuel markets and to have the same taxes, like 10%. We also want the same measures used in Germany and France, and also to have these pellets as a standard in different efficiency markets.
We are missing as well in Spain a program that says goodbye gasol, as it is one in France and in other countries. Also talking about gas oil, the removal or the bonification, So they need to take it away to remove it, to be at the same level of biofuels. Also, we will need to have, a marketing campaign, regarding the different buildings running with biofuels. So, with something like the details, details about, the renewable consumption, So we want to see a panel, a report to see the efficiency by using biomass. We have some installations, but actually no details are provided about the benefit of using this biomass and these biomass installations. And then I will think about another measure, such as the count of the carbon print, be also recon. So with the so-called air pump. So the life cycle, that's what we need to know about the air pump, heating pump. And last but not least, we should ask the administration to comply with all the regulations, for example, those 70 and 80-year installation with fossils. Well, the administration needs to take into account that those are outdated and they need to report this to the different users. To recap what Pablo and Frank said, in the end, this is about having the administration to generate a sustainable, renewable resource at local level. So before 2022, there was a feedstock crisis, and we have wood. We don't have fossil fuels, but we have wood. So I couldn't think about countries Asian countries that generate, fossil products, we just stop using those feedstock and start thinking about importing biomass. So it makes sense. We are thinking about another technology, greener technology than the one we are producing. That's not going to happen. So it's Europe as a clean producer, as a biomass producer of biomass, we can actually benefit. We can promote imports. Instead of promoting these fossil fuels imports, we should, do otherwise. And now, actually, Europe is, going after, penalizing, the sector who is trying to generate this type of fuels, biofuels. And so, in my view, if the administration, general over administration, at European level, a local administration, national administration, believe this energy and know about it, it will be easy to find a solution. Flexible solutions, quick solutions that will reach, the end user and to promote. I don't know about if subsidies, but at least finding, taxation solutions that allow the end user to use this type of technologies and products. And of course, start thinking that fossil fuels, such as gasoil, should not be in place as a combustion fuel. In the past, these were, essential because there were no other alternatives. But we do have those clear alternatives here in Europe, named biomass, and this is our commitment. We're talking about administrations. Okay. From our stand, we don't need to invent anything. Countries such as Spain, Austria, Germany, France, Italy, whose subsidies are being, discontinued, and the growth of boilers and stoves, has decreased. France also, is another country. Germany, also a country that didn't know, because just 2 years ago, there were about 70,000 boilers installed a year, and now only 60,000. So somehow we need to coordinate these aids, subsidies, grants, across sectors. Austria, for example, has grown a lot, 250% when it comes to boilers installation. So we can tell that if installation is in place, users, are interested. So we need to focus on this, with this.
Manolis, at European level, we are talking about how to reactivate the sector, the pellet sector. What's your opinion? It's important the role of the public administrations there?
Yeah, for sure. One thing that we have seen that works very well, if I understood your answer well, is the Austrian example.
Exactly.
The Austrian government reactivated the internal pellet sector by giving some very generous subsidies for new pellet boiler installations. I believe that 2024 was a record year for the Austrian pellet boiler manufacturers in history. I think more than 50,000, if I remember correctly, new installations. And if you consider that every pellet boiler in Austria consumes about more or less 5 tons of pellets per heating season, you can also understand what this means for the demand. So this is one good example. Austria may be a bit of a peculiar case because they have a very strong boiler industry. So there is also a component of incentivizing or supporting the manufacturing industry, but it's a good example and it works. I also would like to see more things taking place in the municipality level. There are many municipalities that have public buildings not necessarily connected to a district heating system that are relying on fossil fuels. I don't see why you cannot have a school heated with pellets. It's a very efficient solution. You can install it even if you have a limited space. Maintenance is relatively easy. You don't need to clean up a bit. So it's a perfect solution, even if you have an installation somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It works very well. And I also think that the sector might want to spend a bit more effort to promote pellets as a solution for small-scale industry. This is also, I think, quite relevant. There are many smaller industries, again, using a lot of fossil fuels. We have bakeries, not an industry, but okay. We have dairy farms, cheese production, whatever. A lot of them use fossil fuels. There is no reason why they could not use pellets. And the good thing there is that the demand usually is more consistent because it's not weather-driven, it's production-driven. So these are some takeaways from me.
Muchísimas gracias, Manolis. Estaba pensando cuando hablabais.
I was thinking now when you were talking of events that we had, such as Filomena, this phenomenon, what happened. So we're talking about electrification, a while, a large, massive electrification of the heating system. So should we ask ourselves that we should commit ourselves for wood, pellets, or biomass in order to fix these type of problems? 100%, of course. I agree 100%. I knew you were going to say that. Yes, we realized on Monday, actually, that power, when the power fails, we cannot, use a unique single solution. And it's not only about heating, but also cars. We want power everywhere. So there are things that are unavoidable, but biomass anyway. Even if the small consumption of power, some work without power, but that doesn't overload the grid, and we are using another resource that it can be managed. If you have photovoltaic energy or wind power, they are not manageable like biomass. We can work about 8,000 hours and use biomass anytime. So this is a different type of bioenergy from photovoltaic and wind power, right? They are different. So if you don't have, batteries are very expensive. That's why we don't have them. So, but they can be combined with biomass and other means to store so that can be connected, linked to the hydraulic industry that kind of generate like a natural cell. But as Manolis said, Mr. Manolis, this is a local solution that can be managed, and it's our. So why we should use it? At least the part that is related to the district heating. We can use the biomass. They want to use the heating with a heating pump, but they need electricity power. But of course, we don't realize this is actually done in the wrong niche, because heating pumps are not feasible, in some places. For example, biomass heating, works very well in some rural areas. What do you think, in your view, in order to be not so dependent on power? Please, any example? In our case, we think that electrifying the demand is a solution. It's not a technical solution. Anyway, having said this, we don't have an energy project in this country. So we envy different countries such as France, where they realize that those rural areas under 30,000 inhabitants, electrification is there. However, they know that 75% of the consumed use energy goes to the heating system. So it seems like electrification is there. If you electrify, the demand, 75% that goes to the heating system, you will need, copper, lead, and also you will encounter some distribution problems, such as the one we saw in Spain these last days. So France wants to, offer solutions to cover that demand that is not dependent of power. And for that reason, France is committed to biomass. So I envy that country energy project. Yes, because I believe this will solve different problems that we experience. So that in the grid, because we should, this way we wouldn't experience that problem that we had on Monday. However, we should know that the heating pump installation went down, was reduced. So, and I think that in the end, you decide your own decision. You have your own decision. So we can see how people, apart from taking into account whatever the government said, they are using they are following their common sense. And for example, 2022, this last winter, we thought it was a big demand in March because the temperatures went down, but people learned how to save, and they're not manipulated so easily. They have their own common sense. And we have some, there's the data, the data about heating pumps, installations. So we have to see how this evolves, but we are sure the user will have the last word. So economy is going slower, and the purchasing power is also reduced. So the heating pump is not perhaps the best solution to comply with that strategy. It doesn't make sense. If the energy demand, world energy demand is increasing, it doesn't make sense to actually prevent using some of the other alternatives, especially a country with energy deficiency such as Spain. We cannot actually leave behind, local resources such as biomass, because we don't introduce fossil fuels, wind power, and photovoltaic energies are being generated to do at some time, not always, not continuously, except if there are some batteries, which is a more complex solution anyway. So the energy mix has to be complementary. So you cannot, just forget about a local resource such as wood and so easily. So so biased. So the solution is to opt for the best solutions, the best alternatives. And I believe the forestry aspect of Spain should be taken into account, should be taken into it should be use because if you don't use it, it's either burned or it's either used for biomass. So there's a better way to use it, to have to control the production of biomass from the forest, because otherwise we prevent, those big fires to happen. So this is common sense. It's about applying, practical view to a solution, the energy solution.
Manolis, the question is, at European level, also the heat depends on electricity, mainly, instead of pellets?
In the European level, the heat is still mostly fossil fuel driven.
Fossil fuels, exactly.
About 80% of the heat is still coming from fossil fuels. Natural gas, oil, and biomass is maybe around 90%, 20%, which is the biggest contributor. And then you have all the rest, solar, thermal, the electricity used in heat pumps, and so forth. So we are still not in an electrified system for sure. The thing with electrification, it is a trend for sure. We need electrification if we need Europe to defossilize. But it is also a buzzword, a slogan. And politicians, like big narratives and simple narratives. So for a politician, it's very simple to go on stage and say, we will electrify everything and get off stage having said their message. The reality is a bit more complex, of course. And I believe we are already seeing the limits or the challenges in electrifying our energy system in Europe today. In Spain, for example, we have PVs already, photovoltaics, but the grid operator often tells you cannot operate your photovoltaic because you have an oversupply and the grid is challenged. We have the exact same situation in Greece now. So investing, for example, in a photovoltaic system is becoming more difficult now rather than easier, and this will increase in the future. It's not our job as a bioenergy sector to solve this issue for the PV sector. They have their own lobbying. But what we can stress out is how we complement the electrification. So everything that you hit with biomass that is efficient, modern, and sustainable, you don't need to electrify. So immediately you reduce some of the challenges to the system. I think if we have some time, it may be relevant to give, let's say, two examples. In Belgium, for example, we have heard that household consumers who buy heat pumps, a big part of them often buy a pellet stove, for example. And they operate the heat pump most of the time. And when it's really cold and the heat pump starts to operate not so efficiently, the pellet stove is turned on and they have efficient heating at home, otherwise they would be cold. If you look also to another case, another scale, in the Nordics, where there are a lot of district heating systems, and you also have cheap electricity for different reasons, there is a trend of installing more heat pumps and integrating them to the district heating systems, but always and still the biomass, let's say, aspect, the biomass boilers are an integral part of the generation in the Nordic district heating system. So I believe this is the way forward. We have to tell and explain to politicians, to scientists, to the society that we complement electrification. We are not an opponent to it.
there is, for you, Manolis, is there any European legislation at some point that can help this sector, this pellet sector?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I will fall back to Jean-Marc's presentation and say that at the moment on the EU level we have more challenges rather than facilitation.
We have noticed something, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know how much time, if you have enough time, I would like to highlight four
let's go for it.
legislations or directives that are of importance for the pellet sector. The first and foremost is the Renewable Energy Directive, because it's the basis for every renewable energy sector. And Jean-Marc explained briefly the challenges we had when there was a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, the so-called RED III, and the fear that some feedstocks would be banned and not consider renewable energy. We have strengthened sustainability criteria and so forth. Now, I have to clarify that for the premium pellet sector, some of this discussion is at the moment a bit more abstract, because the premium pellet sector is smaller installations that are way below the threshold levels of RED III. But as a broader political discussion, it is of relevance. The second legislation I would like to highlight is EUDR, the European Deforestation Regulation, which for the sector, I see some smiles, is a headache since it was announced. Nobody in the bioenergy sector has an issue with the goal of EUDR, which is to protect the forests and to safeguard the forests from degradation or from deforestation. The issue that we have is the implementation of EUDR. And there are some things like the geolocation of, especially of residues, which are very, very challenging for the pellet sector. If you have sawdust in a pellet plant or in a sawmill, you mix it up because it's a residue, and then you produce your pellets. But how can you trace this pile of sawdust to an individual plot of land? It becomes very, very challenging, and this is something that we are still working on to have some meaningful simplifications in the EUDR that will help the sector and not create another burden. The third one is eco-design energy labeling. Jean-Marc mentioned this in his presentation. This is something that affects the stoves and the boilers, but it is really, really important for what I mentioned before, the organic growth of the pellet sector. If you have an eco-design that is too strict, and the first draft we saw, 85, 100% of the pellet stove and boilers would be out of the market, you would go to an empty EXPOBIOMASA. There would be no products that you could display. So how can a new household buy a device, or how can an existing household replace their own device? The market would not die immediately, but it would be a slow fade into extinction. And the last legislation, which is a bit more interesting, not necessarily an opponent or a barrier, but it will create some, I think, interesting dynamics, is the Green Claims Directive. In the Green Claims Directive, this is not bioenergy thing, it's a broader product. What you can say about the environmental claims of a product. And basically, Green Claims is saying, before I say that this bottle is sustainable, I need to have some kind of certification behind it. So the interesting question for the premium pellet sector is, what will a premium pellet producer be able to say about their pellets? Will they be able to say and advertise to the public that they are green, as it is now, or would they need some certification? This may not be bad news for some people. If you want to be SUR certified, for example, it's an opportunity, I think. But it'll be interesting to see the dynamics. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you very much for clarifying that.
We have the questions that it came. Pablo, this is for you. They're asking us what is the general line for the main figures of the Spanish market in 2024 and the national production of pellets and the exports and prices and sellings, where the exports are going to. Well, in 2023, we're talking about around 750, more or less, and we lowered 15%, 18% the consumption. So I make the operations now, but then you have the, if you do here the operation, then you get the answer of production. And as I said before, regarding the consumption, we are about 850,000, more or less, because the winter was not, at we said here, it wasn't too strong, but it was long and continuous. So the consumption was quite stable. We calculate that around 850,000 tons. And regarding the imports and exports, it's a bit more complicated, and Roberto can talk more about this, just in case I had some deviations and he can correct. But we export around 100,000 tons to France and Italy, basically, and import around the same amount from Portugal. I don't know, you would like to say something else? Yes, well, regarding the last part of exports and imports, it was fewer imports from Portugal during the last year, and the exports was mainly, as Pablo was saying, it was France and France. Italy maybe was the one that failed a little bit in the exporting part of what? Yes, we were talking about lower incentives in Italy, so this is what happens. Also, we are talking about Italy is a great exporter, so we are competing with a country that raised the exports to Italy, so it filled the gap. So we exported a lot. And also Italy, at the end, it was the black hole in which all the overstocks end up from the camping, the year before camping. And we're talking about being a black hole because it was much more complicated to export this year, these campaigns, pellets, because we had overstock. But the real campaign is for winter, so it starts and it coincides in 2 years if we are talking about the timing. So the campaign was a longer campaign, but the consumption and the intern level, it increased in an important way compared to the previous year, which was a much shorter period. Actually, Roberto just said it, but with the crisis that we had in Ukraine, and the Italian market was looking for pellets outside of the regular providers, Austria or Spain, or France. So they already had suppliers from Brazil or Argentina. And now those suppliers are already there. And it's true that Italy has consumed more than the 2 previous years, but first of all, there was a lot of stock. Roberto was saying that it was all the pellet, all our overstock went there, and there are more supplier countries that are bringing their pellets to Italy. That's the main problem. Okay, for the new audience, you have QR codes to make your questions. It's here, but I think I'm hiding it. But you have all the QR codes around the room. If you take a picture with your cell phone, you will have a form. We are at the session of a roundtable about the pellet market. You can send all your questions, and they're going to send them to me directly, so I could read them for you. We have more questions, and this is more like a general question. What are the fuels that are competing with pellet? Are mainly fossil fuels? Is any question? Yes, mainly fossils, but other biomass that are affecting to the pellets, and it affected to this campaign. For example, the olive stone that was very cheap, it took away some tons that it used to be pellet, but the main enemy is not olive stone, but fossil fuel. Yes, so more than the enemy is like the enemy to substitute, actually. It has no sense that nowadays they are burning gas oil to produce thermal energy in a country that we don't have that necessity. we could have an alternative that could be clear and easy. So we should start forgetting about those fossil fuels and start sending them for more complicated uses that could be substituted for pellets. But we could use these pellets for other the main usage. But it's competing with other natural gas, but it's more complicated to compete because of the facilities. But all the gas oil facilities, they should actually start to be at the end of the life, this lifespan. So since they need their own deposit, it's quite easy to substitute these facilities for pellet facilities. And be more clear about what Roberto was talking about. This is a country that is producing a lot of wood from the forests. And with the climate change, many times in some parts of our country we have to substitute species, and in other parts we have to reduce the load because for many years we have been accumulating wood in the forest. So whether you burn it at the stove or you burn it at the forest, so that management of the forest should produce much more material to have a surplus material, and we should reconduct this to a domestic use or plants. And yes, actually, this is consuming waste, right? Yes, we should have to reduce the load. We never talk about waste, but byproduct. Okay, perfect. Years before, we used to talk to the sawmill talking about waste, but now the sawmill and the forest, we talk about byproducts, forestry byproducts, because we use them as fuels. Okay, byproducts. How is the pellet being positioned in euro per kilo hour compared to the fossils? Is this the cheapest? It is around 7 cents per kilowatt per hour, I think. And natural gas in some moments. We're talking about domestic consumption because industrial prices are different. But natural gas is around 7, 8, 9. It depends on the time of the year. But gas oil is around 9 or 10. And electricity is around 20 something, but it depends on the hour and the time of the year. But a heat pump, you have to divide that and between the scope factor. So it depends on who you ask to, or a consumer or a manufacturer. So it depends. But our average price is 2.5. This is the data that we publish in Avebiom website, but it will be around 10, more or less 10 or 9. I cannot remember well. About the pellet consumption, was the install based in boilers and stoves in Spain? Pablo, they go for you. It depends on the year actually, but in good years, 2-3 years ago, we had like 50,000 stoves installed, and the accumulated was around 200-300,000 stoves. These years were a little bit more like not so good, but we hope to recover, and it's around 35,000 stoves per year. The stoves and boilers, the good years, we were installing around 10,000. But right now, I cannot really give you a figure, but we have a statistic annual that we usually post in our website, and we do it yearly. Those are the numbers. David, why a country like France or other European countries had a growing factor in the pellet market, but Italy and Spain is more like stuck? This answers to the first question or the second question that we had. What has the government to do to promote the development of biomass? Like with France, This is been one of the best with around 2.59 millions de consumo en Francia, de toneladas de consumo, más o menos, with a growing factor of value because France really wanted to improve this in rural areas and model the country. And Italy doesn't have much explanation because the growth was quite steep, and that was normal that at some point that was going to be more like a moderate growing. But if we talk about Austria, that who installed 16,000 stoves, in Germany, who started with 75 and it has decreasing, but with a very high consumption. This is thanks to the governments because they pushed to develop the pellet market. Actually, those are the engines, the promoters. And as a manufacturer, we had some investments and we want to generate in the market, but the one that is really helping is the government. We think that was the most general topic. We need some help from the government. I want to say that we need subsidies, or at least removing the subsidies for the fossil fuels, because it's surprising that there are not subsidies for the renewable energy sectors, biomass specifically. But in some ways, there are subsidies for natural gas in the facilities. So this should change and try to have a policies to say goodbye to the gas oil and hello to biomass and electricity. But little by little, like the politics that had policies in other countries like Austria. I would like to add also that in this aspect, the main difference in these markets in France and Germany and Austria compared to Spain and Italy, it is the selling channel. In these countries, the channel, biomass channel, is a professional channel. In Italy and Spain, it's more about the stove market, and it was more about the DIY, and like typical situation that you installed that with my brother-in-law, and now we want to change that and to feel that you are supported by a professional channel to try to find the best solution with you, and they are going to be with you for any incidents or problems. So we have been working many years. I think we are the eldest in this sector, and we didn't find any friction until nowadays. Talking about installation. But the eco-design 2022, once it started, the installers, they were saying that they were installing like they have done entire lives, but that was not like that. They need different kind of treatments and different flows and different emissions, and the professional installer didn't have any problems, but they do it yourself, and the friends who installed that, they had some problems, and mainly with the solution, because it is the game has changed, so you have to act differently. There's a question for you, Roberto. What is the agri-food waste converted to pellet in Spain, and what is the main challenge related to other biomass sources? Agri-food waste for pellet production is quite complicated. The pellet that is made in Spain is mainly domestic pellet in general lines. For industrial sector as well, but it's not significant. But for the domestic pellet, cannot be done based on farm waste because the percentage of ashes are out of the norm, the legislation. So this is directed to stoves, mainly small boilers and stoves that need a quality of 1, EN plus 1, that it cannot comply farming waste. So the main raw material for us is about wood, mainly conifers and mainly pine trees, which is a species that has an equivalent of heating power an ash percentage that is very interesting. I think in the Iberian Peninsula is the most interesting raw material to make a quality pellet. But in order to make the manufacturing the pellet based on farm waste, I'm sure that could be available, but for some uses, it will be feasible maybe for the industrial sector, and there are a lot of projects based on pruning waste and grape production waste, and I'm sure there's a niche to work on, but that's an industrial environment. But talking about the domestic use is what we're based on in a national level. That could be complicated. We have some minutes in case you want to continue asking your questions. We have another question that is an open question to all of you, but specifically from Spain. What's the main reasons of a decreasing, an important decreasing to the pellet installations, mainly in Spain? Okay, I'm going to start. Okay, Francisco. I'm going to talk about comparative. Also, the paint market has decreased. In 2022, everyone has painted their houses. So we do not pretend to have also people painting their houses in 2004, 2025. In 2022, the selling of equipment has increased significantly, but we think it is about the market trend. It's true that another comparative is when a user wants to renew the car, they don't know what car they should buy because the legislation is not clear. But in this roundtable, the end user does not have enough information or is highly influenced about the solution that they should take, because some time ago there was a fake news saying that it's going to be pellet facilities are going to be prohibited. So sometimes the users, they want to hide and they don't know what to buy. And regarding the stove selling market, some news say that they are firing all their workers because the market is not working the way they thought. But it is an accumulation of both things. One, to be anticipating to the future sellings in 2000 based on 2022, and also that the users don't have all the tools in order to find the best solution possible. I would like to add very quickly that in 2022 we also saw that it was an increased sellings because it was the cheapest option, and we saw that we had a trending topic of biomass because everyone went to biomass. So there were more more sales. But based on all the raw materials, the pellet price raised. So there was a moment that it raised almost up to double, but natural gas increasing 6 or 7 times, and gasoil, you can imagine. So at some moment, people said, "Oh my!" The moment I bought the pellet facilities equipment, the things got doubled. So it makes no sense. So since a year ago, we have a stable price compared to the previous years. So now you have to overcome that fear and remember that all the prices could rise. But come on, the price is very stable. It was just a one-time event. I agree with self-criticism to the sector because we don't have a good communication channel, and the forestry sector does not communicate very well, and the pellet sector communicate quite bad. There was a big increase with the raw material crisis in 2022 regarding the prices, but it was the same in the increase of the gas and electricity prices. That is more common than in our case. But everyone approves that. Everyone approves the movement. We all accept that. But when the pellet price increases in a small portion, people complain like it's the end of the world. But it's not like that. We have to show a more like long-term vision because it's a cheap energy, a very competitive energy. And in stable environments, it's more like flat, and you could forecast how it's going to move. And it allows the users to have a very stable prices equipment for heating systems. I think this is going to be the last question to finish this roundtable. There is a new directive of to finish using pellets for the housing. Is the pellet really preparing for this? I think this is for Manolis.
Vale. There is a new legislation in which pone fecha para dejar de usar combustibles fósiles, in which you have to stop at European level, I think, to stop using fossil fuels. How the pellet industry is being prepared for that?
I don't think there is a specific legislation that is explicitly telling you to stop fossil fuels at the moment in Europe. There are directives that are promoting the use of renewable energy fuels. There are directives that are somehow making the use of fossil fuels more difficult or more expensive, like ETS, the European Emission Trading System. But there is no explicit legislation that is telling you you have to stop fossil fuels on an EU level, at least. And actually, as Bioenergy Europe, this has been one of our core requests to the European Commission. Set a fossil fuel exit date, per sector at least. On the country level, there are countries which set fossil fuel exit days for specific sectors, for heating or for whatever. But how the pellet sector is preparing for that depends a lot on the country. If I can give, let's say, might be relevant to give a specific example, Poland. I believe someone was mentioning Poland before. Poland is a very interesting country because for residential heating, it still uses a lot of coal, which is very polluting, of course. And there is a lot of emphasis in Poland to switch from coal heating to more efficient solutions. They have a program called the Cleaner Program. Up until now, it was supporting pellet installations, heat pumps, and natural gas. I believe in the new version of the program that is released now this spring, natural gas is out. So the main two solutions that you have are pellets and heat pumps. And something interesting to note is that heat pumps in Poland in the past were marketed very, very aggressively. I was speaking with colleagues in Brussels who are from Poland, and they were telling me that salesmen were phoning them to push them to install a heat pump. And many Polish households did so. And the promises the salesmen made were that you would get an electricity bill that was nothing, you would heat your household for free. And when they get the electricity bill after the heat pump installation, they were shocked. And that prompted a very big public debate in Poland. If you go to websites, you will see the fight that is taking place there between the heat pump sector and the pellet sector. And now the Cleaner Program, the rate of applications has reversed. More people are applying for pellet boilers compared to heat pumps.
Okay.
So, and of course, the sector needs to be prepared for that, because when you have this wave of new applications, you have to deliver the boilers, and then you also need to deliver the pellets at prices that remain cost competitive so that you don't lose your credibility and your new customers. So I cannot give you an easy answer to that, but yeah, things are moving sometimes in the right direction.
Good news, at least.
Yeah.
Vale.
With this question, we are finishing our roundtable, not forgetting that with those QR codes, if you have any other questions, you can give them to any of our speakers, and we will resend the questions to the speakers, and they can answer you directly on the email address that you send in this QR code. So I want to thank to all the speakers, Manuel Karampinis, Pizà, Francisco Álvarez, Roberto Bravo, and Pablo Rodero for their participation. And please, a big applause for them. Thank you so much.